Hello and welcome to Radiovision. My name is Bernard White. I'll be the host for today's program. Today we take a look at the upcoming election at WBAI Radio. As you know, as part of what has been labeled a democratization process, WBAI has been having elections where subscribers to the station have been elected periodically to become a part of the local station board. Today we have some guests in the studio that are going to tell us a bit about the local station board, what it does, some of the issues that it faces, and some of the issues that WBAI is facing. As you know, periodically we come to you and talk about what's going on at WBAI because we feel that it's a very important institution, one that has the capacity to do something that's very unique in media, and that is to tell the truth. So today we're going to have three guests with us. We have John Brinkley, who is the chair of the local station board. We have Vajra Kilgour, who is a producer, and also she's running for the local station board. And Bob Lederer, who is a longtime member of the station board and also a WBAI producer. Welcome to Radiovision.
Thank you.
Okay. Could you tell our listeners just what are the responsibilities of the local station board? John, as chair, maybe you can lay that out.
Well, the local station board has one main responsibility is to recommend and hire a general manager. It also has some fiduciary responsibilities. It is not a fundraising board. It is primarily looks at the policies and recommends things that need to be done. We run town hall meetings. We establish the evaluation of the general manager. We have a committee that looks to screen. One big need we have right now is for a program director, and we have a committee that is sending out job requests and will screen the candidates for the program director. But WBAI is a part of the Pacifica Foundation, so a lot of the higher level decisions are made at the corporation, at the foundation level.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could add that Pacifica Foundation is composed of 4 other non-commercial community stations in 4 other cities, and WBAI's delegation elects members to sit on the national board, which really has the ultimate power over everything that happens in the network, including the budget and the policies and the hiring of national management. So that's a very key role that the local board members play.
Right. I mean, I could also add that it's a governance board, as John said. It's not a fundraising board. It's a governance board, so there are sometimes blurred lines around the degree to which it ought to be involved in station management. But it is meant to be an oversight and governance board.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that I constantly get as I move around the city is just what is happening at WBAI right now. What is happening at WBAI?
Well, there's, I would say, several kind of trends are converging. One is that over the last 7 years, there's been a group that has had control of the local board that is now calling themselves Indie Caucus. WBAI Indie Caucus in the past has been called ACE, has had different names, but their goal seems to be to kind of exercise unquestioned control over the programming and over the personnel and really every aspect about the station. And they have a long track record of some of their members have been quite vocal in opposing programming that really puts forward strong voices of Black liberation. And although they put forward their issues and their attacks on our group, we're part of a group called the Justice and Unity Campaign. Around other issues, they clothe it in terms of good management or financial responsibility. A lot of it does come down to this issue about the politics of what's on the air. And that's led to some very good people being forced out by them, including yourself, Bernard, as the former program director, outrageously mistreated and fired without any shred of due process and without any legitimate grounds for removing you after decades of good service to the station. So that's who we're up against, and they control the local board. On the more positive note, the people who are aligned with our group on the national level of the Pacifica Network have a majority on that governance body. And so there's kind of a push and pull, because there's some powers for the local board has under the bylaws and some that the national board has. So we're really working in this election to take control back of the local board, take a majority back, so that we can get the station out of the horrible financial mess that it's been in for several years now, and that this group in control has made far worse than it might have been.
Well, one of the things that I kind of noticed in trying to assess some of the issues around what's taking place at WBAI is the role that money has played in the election. How has money impacted this election process?
Well, similar to what has done with the regular national elections, people, primarily the indie, who have money, they have a number of millionaires associated with their group. They're able to come out immediately at the same time that the ballots and were supposed to come out. They come out with a newspaper, basically, detailing a lot of information. A lot of it is misstated or incorrect or out and out false. But it impresses people because it's there, it's timely, it looks like it's well done, it's laid out and everything. So they kind of skew the information, because they put out their propaganda, and they skew the information, and so that is one big impact that money does have. Since overall the station is kind of starved for money, and the people associated with it are, give what they can, and when there's a lot of information given in a timely manner, it kind of dominates people. It's kind of like Fox News. They have a big audience, and they're out there all the time, and so they're able to kind of dominate the opinion about what's going on in the station.
And this goes back years, because it's been true in every election. In previous elections, they put out very slick 4-color mailers full of misinformation and disinformation, but pulled together very aesthetically. There's a lot of marketing expertise there, and basically, so they have marketed themselves in an extremely clever way. And this year we find a lot that with the money to put out an entire newspaper, that they were essentially, and they've done this also in their announcements on the air, attributed to themselves anything good that Justice and Unity had achieved, and attributed to Justice and Unity their blunders, the way in which the station has gone downhill under their tenure. It's like a looking glass world, actually. It's like going through the looking glass. Everything gets turned around, and so there are, sometimes it's sort of like sociopathic preemptive first strike accusations, and sometimes it's just flat turning everything around 180 degrees. It's very difficult to contend with.
And we have responded by very painstakingly raising the money to do our own mailer. What we're talking about are mailers that go directly to the voters. At this point, sadly, only 8,000 people are members of WBAI, whereas 3 years ago it was 16,000. So it's been a drastic drop-off. But in any case, the mailer goes to all of them, and so we have responded with our own to tell our side of the story and really get the truth out there. But I think part of what we want to make clear is that this is not just a power struggle or us against them. Our group, the Justice and Unity Campaign, has consistently done everything we can to keep the station alive and indeed to try to turn it back to thriving as it was in the 90s and the early 2000s. And we have very concrete plans. We spent a lot of time last year working on a detailed plan for reversing the station's financial decline and reaching out and revitalizing its base, recruiting more youth, working on multiple high-tech levels that these days that media has to be present in order to reach a broad audience. It has to have mobile applications. It has to be digital and easily distributable in small sound bites and or at least small segments. And that's something that we are very committed to, and we've done what we can, but it really helps to have that majority of the board that then can make our ideas into policy.
And maybe I should have started out with this in the interest of full disclosure. I ran with the Justice and Unity coalition or group because I felt that they had the only possibility of trying to bring about some sanity to what seemed to be a very insane process. And I've been a board member for a long time. In fact, my tenure has stretched out because of the lack of revenue to conduct elections. But has this experiment in democracy worked? It's supposed to have been a way of bringing people into the process and having them to be decision makers in how this station is run.
Well, you know what Martin Luther King said, that the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. The arc is still out on this. Right now,
is it bending at all?
It would keep hope alive, right now, it looks bad because, as Bob said, it's been in decline since Amori left, and since you left, it's been in a rapid decline. And you can actually benchmark that. And the sad thing is, everyone calls himself progressive, but everyone has different visions on what that would look like. And I don't know I can't look into people's hearts and find out, in their minds, and find out what they really are thinking about. But you see, some things are just thrown out just to be malicious and just to cut people down, as opposed to if you have competing ideas, what they usually do, like with unions and management, you sit up in negotiations. You state your position, and you negotiate. You negotiate something that everyone is reasonably comfortable with. This doesn't happen. So the idea of elections and having people elected from the staff and having people elected from the listeners theoretically is okay. But the rest of the mechanism in order to resolve issues it's not in place. There needs to be something else in order to, other than that, it says power plays. It says power plays, other than there being resolution of some legitimate, some illegitimate, but saying legitimate differences.
And I mean, this goes back all the way to the 2001 coup, that the organizing around taking back the station was split. And the group that has called itself variously Listprog, ACE, Indies, Independence, whatever, were very intent on this system of governance and this system of elections, which is not wonderfully democratic, the actual process. And it was always my impression that they were looking more for control even than governance. And that I'm not sure it's clear to them the difference. There are a lot of things that the board is supposed to do that they haven't do that are fairly simple, like organizing town hall meetings, things that are in the bylaws but are not important to whatever their agenda is. So they just let them, those things don't happen. There's certain aspects of the board then, as a governance board, takes on an enormous amount of work. And I'm not sure that everyone who gets elected is in a position to be able to do that kind of work. So normally the board of a not-for-profit, you'd be looking to balance people who could raise funds. You would want to have a lawyer. You would want to have an accountant. You would have, and that would be an oversight board, not a governance board, but an oversight board. Lou Hill's idea was that the people who listened would vote by contributing.
Lou Hill was the founder of the Pacific Network
yes, thank you.
1946.
Yes, he was the founder of the network, and his approach was that the listeners would vote with their dollars. And so this is like an added layer here. And it does seem to be aimed more at control than at governance, and assorted other ideas, because we had problems with the board before, such as a reasonably simple recall process were sort of not considered or slapped away. And there's a great deal of hysteria around, among those who were proponents of this form of governance, that if you were opposed, if you thought this maybe wasn't the best way to structure it, the screaming would begin, that you were opposed to democracy. So it wasn't a particularly rational discussion to begin with.
Management to really guide folks into a way to become part of the process, the station, and develop their skills.
What role has racism played in bringing BAI to where it is now?
It has definitely played a role. And I think that, alas, historically, there's a long history of progressive movements made up largely of paler people that have never gotten over being white, and have had long histories of discrimination. Eugene Debs wouldn't campaign in the South because the Socialist Party would not have integrated meetings. It's a long history. It's a long history of a huge kind of, I don't know what it is, a blind spot or something among many progressives, many white progressives, that they are not able to overcome their conditioning around what it means to be white, or what it means for other people to be other colors, and their assumptions. And I think it has played a very large role. I think it played a very large role in the horrible harassment of you, and ultimately getting rid of you. And I sat on the search committee for a program director, and I'm sorry, but not one candidate really could come up to your ankles. And so they got rid of you without having a thought, apparently, in their minds about who might take your place. There was a kind of hysteria. And in particular, one of the millionaires, I think, was really playing people's unresolved, both staff and listeners, unresolved racial stuff like a violin. Just playing it like a violin. And I wish it weren't true, but it has played a role.
Yeah, I wanted to give a specific example that is very telling. This same individual who has been the loudest voice of harassment and insistence that you had to be fired, when he was asked about his constant claim that the station under your directorship of programming was engaging in anti-white programming. That was his claim. And so someone said, well, give us one concrete example. And he said, it's hour after hour of programming about reparations with a thinly veiled anti-white tone. Now, I listened to that program. He was referring to at your direction. There was live coverage of a national rally in Washington, D.C., and I believe it was 2002. Thousands of people gathered to demand reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans who have never been paid and were brutally exploited and oppressed. And I listened to that coverage. There wasn't a moment in which white people in general were demonized or said to be the enemy. It was about the power structure of institutional racism and white supremacy.
What role has racism played in bringing BAI to where it is now?
It has definitely played a role. And I think that, alas, historically, there's a long history of progressive movements made up largely of paler people that have never gotten over being white and have had long histories of discrimination. Eugene Debs wouldn't campaign in the South because the Socialist Party would not have integrated meetings. It's a long history. It's a long history of a huge kind of, I don't know what it is, a blind spot or something among many progressives, many white progressives, that they are not able to overcome their conditioning around what it means to be white or what it means for other people to be other colors and their assumptions. And I think it has played a very large role. I think it played a very large role in the horrible harassment of you and ultimately getting rid of you. And I sat on the search committee for a program director, and I'm sorry, but not one candidate really could come up to your ankles. And so they got rid of you without having a thought, apparently, in their minds about who might take your place. There was a kind of hysteria. And in particular, one of the millionaires, I think, was really playing people's unresolved, both staff and listeners, unresolved racial stuff like a violin. Just playing it like a violin. And I wish it weren't true, but it has played a role.
Yeah, I wanted to give a specific example that is very telling. This same individual who has been the loudest voice of harassment and insistence that you had to be fired, when he was asked about his constant claim that the station under your directorship of programming was engaging in anti-white programming. That was his claim. And so someone said, well, give us one concrete example. And he said, it's hour after hour of programming about reparations with a thinly veiled anti-white tone. Now, I listened to that program. He was referring to at your direction. There was live coverage of a national rally in Washington, D.C., in I believe it was 2002. Thousands of people gathered to demand reparations for the descendants of enslaved Africans who have never been paid and were brutally exploited and oppressed. And I listened to that coverage. There wasn't a moment in which white people in general were demonized or said to be the enemy. It was about the power structure of institutional racism and white supremacy. And it wasn't about white people as individuals. So this kind of paranoid white supremacist fantasy that, as Vajra was saying, is the progressives and the left are not immune to that kind of thinking, has really deeply affected some of the people who are the loudest in, sometimes they're more open, like this person was, in saying it's about the programming, but often it's clothed around other things. Well, they're corrupt, they're stealing, they're mismanaging, they're allowing, an unfair treatment, whatever. But I think when you strip that back, the core does come down to racism.
Mm-hmm. John?
A lot of this happened before I was...
Racism did?
This
He's had a very sheltered life.
This manifestation at BAI, I can see the vestiges of it, and it's some of it, as Bob was saying, is kind of clouded. Because, during police brutality, whenever people are shocked when there's a black policeman brutalizing a black person, but it's not the color, it's the, they all put on the blue and they play out and support those ethics. So on one side, you see a mixture of black folks involved in terms of supporting some of the practices that have led to the ouster of very strong, and I think part of it is if you are meek and condescending, fine, you go along, but if you're strong and you're in a power position, you got to go. And I think that's what happened with you. And you can see now that even though Justice and Unity has, in the last couple of years, gained some measure of control at the national level with our allies, and had, for a brief period, some control on the local board, the dominance has been with those who don't like strong-minded African American people in power positions who exert their power and have to go. So that is what I see from the period of time. But I've been looking and listening to WBAI since the early 70s, when a good friend of mine, Pepsi Charles, had Nuances. And she would tell me about the battles and everything going on. So BI has not been exempt from there being battles. It's just that more recently, the nature of the battle has been tinged with racism.
Mm-hmm.
I think a cousin of Colin Powell's once said that he thought that Colin Powell's appeal was that he said white people really hate it when you tell them what racist mother bleepers they really are. And Colin doesn't make white people feel uncomfortable. But a station like WBAI really has as its brief to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And if there is programming, and I think that there were people who were made uncomfortable by the programming as well, they should be. Most of the news induces discomfort. They didn't want to feel uncomfortable. And so it was a cross between programming that may have made some people feel uncomfortable, and, as John says, black people in positions of power that they really felt ought to be reserved for white people, or black people who would be sufficiently submissive. And that is, frankly, racist, to my thinking.
Now, when is this election supposed to take place?
Well, the ballots were mailed October 15th, but because of financial crisis in Pacifica, the decision, I think the right decision was made to use bulk rate, which is much cheaper than first class. So that can take up to sometimes a little more than 2 weeks. So hopefully any day now, the voters will start getting their ballots in the mail. But in any case, the ballots are out there, should start arriving, and people have till December 4th to return. The ballots must be returned by December 4th.